All right, everyone, how are you? It's Phil, and I'm back with another edition of Star Trek Discovery review. And there will be spoilers, so if you have not watched the episode, you may not want to listen to this. But if you have, then definitely listen to this. And those of you who haven't, come back later and listen. By the way, thank you so much for the views and all the support that you've been showing for this small podcast that's done with a lot of love. And I apologize for last week with the sound issues. I was just testing stuff out, and you probably couldn't hear me that well for the first 10 minutes or so. But I got that figured out. One is I cut the music, although I got the music to work on another podcast, so eventually I'll get it going. But I'm trying some new stuff out, and I'm not as tech savvy as Stamets over there and Tilly, so I'll get it eventually. So let's get going, because this episode here, episode 4, and Obol for Charon, was so damn good. Anybody that listened to the last podcast know how much I really detested episode 3. And some people have told me to give it another try. I don't know if I could sit through all that again. But this episode made me forget about last week. And I was 100% glued to my screen, tuned into this one. It felt like such a classic Trek episode, but with the modern feel of the modern Trek, and it was just a perfect blend of what Discovery wants to be while still honoring what Star Trek is, and it just made me feel good about life in general in the Trek universe. But before we get going on this episode, here's a little possible theory on Spock, and it's that Section 31 probably has something to do with Spock's disappearance. Because you can see there from the CBS trailer or CBS All Access trailer, that he's on the bridge of some ship, and that ship looks a lot like the Section 31 ship that we saw last week with Giorgio on it. So, what do you guys think? Is there a possible connection there? I definitely don't believe Spock turned into an assassin. He's gone crazy before, but not that crazy. So, what do you guys think? Could it be? Is there a Section 31 twist that's coming? We don't know. It's getting kind of exciting. I'm kind of really interested in this whole Spock mystery at the moment. But let's get to this episode. It begins with number 1 coming on the ship, played by Rebecca Romaine. She did a great job. I wish it would have been a little bit longer, but she came in with a specific mission, and that mission was to give Pike information on Spock and his whereabouts. She was able to get a little bit of a track on him out in space because he escaped from wherever they were holding him. So she came in, did her job, and left. Wouldn't mind seeing her again. I like the interplay between the two. Very professional, but very charismatic at the same time. Pike is the king of charisma here this season. Not as charismatic as Lorca, but Lorca got to play a bad guy. So, bad guys are always more charismatic than the good guys. But love the interplay there. She was really good for that small bit that she appeared in. I'm going to talk about something else that I loved about this episode that just brought me back, made me feel like, woohoo, this show is on working on all cylinders. And that was the fact that, oh my God, we had a ready room. A ready room. They talked about it a few episodes back, right? So it was really cool to see it, man. I mean, those were really some of my favorite scenes from Star Trek The Next Generation when they all sat and just try to figure things out inside their little ready room. And so it was cool to see it. kind of sucked that Pike wasn't there, but we had Miss Burnham taking care of things, and you can see Saru there's holding his neck, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but they're trying to figure out what this Red Angel business is about. And another thing that brought me right back to classic Trek was tech issues. And it was a really cool scene there where everybody started speaking in a bunch of different languages because the universal translator was malfunctioning. And again, Burnham figures out that it was a virus and that it's translating everything into a different language. Now, why does this happen? It happens because the Discovery runs into this big ass sphere. And again, classic Trek space anomaly. Loved it. And I love these shots of the Starship Discovery, man. They were so beautiful. You got to see the scope of this sphere and how small the ship was compared to it. I must admit, I haven't been a big fan of the design of the Discovery, but it's growing on me. But these shots were amazing. I loved them. They looked beautiful, and they were throughout the episode. I not necessarily going in order here, but this fear is the cause for the translator malfunction and a few other things that go on the ship throughout this episode. And one of those things has to do with our little blob. Remember that Stamets sucked that blob out of Tilly last week, right? And we kind of find out what this blob is about, and it ends up that it's pretty much a sentient being, and it builds more towards this theory of why is it that we never hear about the spore drive in future Treks. It's because this spore drive is going to end up being very unethical, because there's a possibility that there's living organisms in there. And, that's a no-no. So then we'll get into that in a second. But first, this was so great, guys. My favorite character so far, Reno. She's back. And I was just hoping to see this interaction between her and Stamets when she said she worked with engineering. I said, uh-oh, she's going to butt heads with one of the hardest heads on the crew. And she did, and it was so funny. The dialogue was so sharp. This is my favorite line here where, Stamets is trying to get at her. And she says that you don't know me. I'm uninsultable, especially by a guy who thinks he can run a ship on mushrooms I pick off my pizza. Oh, man, that line cracked me up. Along with a whole host of other lines that they just threw back at each other. And they were having a great debate, by the way, about, dilithium versus the spore drive, and how she's much more into the old-fashioned way. He's into looking into the future and new ways to produce energy to travel. But, as we're going to see in a second, there may be some problems with that. But before we go there, guys, I'm in love with this woman. She not only mentioned bubblegum, as a way to fix things. She mentioned duct tape. And then a little bit later, when she kind of got knocked on her ass, she mentioned she was having a dream where she was Prince's drummer. So you mentioned gum, duct tape, and Prince in one episode. It's Trek Gold. I give this episode a 10. And there's even another reference that's going to appear in a second. But let's get to it, man. What's going on with this spore drive and this mycelial? Is that the correct way to say it, network? We find out that this blob, it jumps back onto Tilly. and they need to try to communicate it with it somehow, and they figure out how to do it with a bunch of techno babble. So there's some techno babble in this episode too, and they discover that, yeah, it's a living entity, and that the mycelial network itself could be a living entity. From what I understood, correct me if I'm wrong. I just finished watching it. I may have to see it again to catch all the details. But they talk to the blob through Tilly, and they do this by getting this. Oh man, they drill a hole in her head and connect something into her brain so that they can have interaction with the blob. And a way to calm her down. Stamets calms Tilly down because they don't have a laser scalpel. They have to actually drill a hole. Man, how could I not love this episode? They started singing David Bowie, Space Oddity. Oh my god, or Space Odyssey. Oh man, there's so much to love about this episode. It just just name dropping Prince and David Bowie in one episode was enough for me. But anyway, back to the blob, as I'm calling it, and the mycelial network. Theories are kind of flowing. I saw a lot of them in the Trek groups this week, and mostly people are thinking that, hey, Starfleet's gonna find out that it's absolutely unethical to use this network because you are actually screwing up an ecosystem, and you're screwing up just living sentient beings, and that's a no-no for Star Trek, right? Even if you go into Star Trek Voyager, where they had found a way to get back home a lot faster, but because of what it required and the fact that it would hurt another sentient being, they said no, right? And they took the long way. So, well, until Janeway did some time traveling business. But anyway, that's another story. So I guess it's leading to that, you know. I would prefer that the Spore Drive kind of stops being used sooner rather than later. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a big fan of it. I thought it was cool. I mean, the effect is cool and the idea of it is cool, but for me, it just feels like just this added thing that I think they just put in there just to differentiate the ship or differentiate the show, whatever. I mean, every Star Trek show's got to have that little gotcha thing that, oh, this is what makes ours a little bit different. You know, TNG had the big ass galaxy ship compared to the original Enterprise. Of course, DS9 had the base, and Voyager had the smaller ship, but that was super powered smaller ship, and they're stuck out in the other end of the universe, and or the galaxy. And Enterprise, well, I don't know, Enterprise sucked. Maybe that's what differentiated it. Oh, I still gotta finish Enterprise, guys. I'm sorry. I am a completist, so I will finish it, but it just didn't catch my attention that much. But okay, so we got the Spore Drive. That's the big woohoo! Look at this. Look at me. But hopefully the show will realize that it can stand on its own legs and on its own warp drive to get from here to there, and they will discontinue the use of this thing sooner rather than later. Another thing that is caused by this sphere in the sky, because here, by the way, they're all stuck in engineering because the ship's going haywire because of this sphere. It's just, you know, screwing up all the systems. Pike's ready to torpedo it. It's creating havoc. But another thing that it does, and it was a great little arc here, is it screws with Saru. As you can see, his little ganglia start getting aroused there, and they're usually aroused when he is in fear, right? Or if there's death nearby. And he realizes in some period of time that he's probably going to die, that he's on the way out. And he goes down to sick bay, and that's when he breaks it down to everybody that, hey, there's a moment in every Kelpian's life where they have to be ready to be slaughtered and die. And it was kind of cool, to hear more about the mythology or the mythos of his people, and it world filled with his dialogue. So that was cool to find out more about his people, and it's gonna come back in the end, guys. Again, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. And I love the line that he gave Pike, because Pike's like, man, you gotta chill. You're gonna die. And because Michael was like, man, I'm gonna figure out some way to, figure out what the hell's going on. And Saru went with her to help her. And Pike was like, no, man, stay here. And he's like, I am dying, but I'm certainly not dead. Great line, great delivery. And it set up what were two very long scenes between Michael and Saru, which I thought were very well done. It softened her up a little bit, definitely. And it really created a bond between the two that wasn't always there, because they always felt like they were at each other's necks. But it showed that they have real respect for one another. So I like that. And this was the first of those scenes where they just talk, 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 talk. And that's a plus for Star Trek Discovery. I mean, the fact that they trust their actors, trust the dialogue enough to just talk. And I think this scene was like 4 or 5 minutes long, if not longer. It's a really long scene. And eventually, as most Star Trek episodes do, they figured out that this malevolent sphere wasn't really malevolent, and it was actually trying to communicate with them. It was dying itself. This is why Saru's little ganglia went up, because it goes up when there's death around, and the sphere was dying. So they figured that this sphere wanted to transmit as much information onto the ship as possible before it dies. And man, that was beautiful. That was it. That's Star Trek. And they went from Pike getting ready to like blow this shit. Ooh, sorry, I try not to curse on Star Trek ones, because the kiddos might be watching. They try to blow this thing out of space, out of the water, out of space, whatever. And Michael and Saru show up on the bridge just in time to tell Pike, hey, listen, don't do it. I mean, the whole point of the Discovery starship, it's a science ship. It's to go out and explore and find, explore new life and new civilizations. And that was a cool moment, very powerful moment for the series, where it doubled down on anybody that criticizes it for, not carrying on Gene's philosophy, the Star Trek philosophy. No, there it is, and it didn't feel forced. It felt like, no, that was the right thing to say at the right time. It got a smile from the bridge crew, which, by the way, they really have been doing a better job at exploring the bridge crew. You saw in the earlier picture, they were all there in the ready room. So that part was cool too. I want to see more of them. I want to hear more of them, because it's a crew. It's not. I mean, as much as I'm not a Michael Burnham hater, there are those out there. There are, but I'm also not a Michael Burnham lover. I mean, she's all right. She's not. She wasn't my favorite actress, even in The Walking Dead, as Sasha. And when they named her as the lead for this show, I was like, oh man. But she's gotten better. She's kind of warming up to the role slowly but surely. But despite the fact that it is a show told through her perspective, it's still a crew, right? I mean, Star Trek the original was told mainly through Kirk or Spock, mainly Kirk's perspective, but you got the whole crew in there. And same with TNG and DS9 and Enterprise and Voyager. The captains were the leads, but you did have episodes where different crew members were the focal point. This was a great example of an episode where they proved that Discovery can do that too. Even though Michael was with Saru through most of his trials and tribulations. And so the sphere does blow up, it dies, but it blows the Discovery far enough away so it doesn't get damaged, and it's cool. I mean, the sphere had been around for 100,000 years, and it downloaded all the things that it had seen throughout the universe onto the ship's computer before it blew, and they were able to figure out how to translate it all. And more importantly, while they were stuck there with the sphere, they had lost track of Spock. Because remember, he escaped on this little ship that the number one had told Pike about. And it took them too long to, figure out the whole sphere issue. So Spock's ship went out of range. They couldn't put a warp. They couldn't pick up his warp signal anymore. But the last thing that the sphere saw was Spock's ship. So all's well that ends well. They were able to pick up Spock's signal again. And after this all happens, Saru is still like on death notice. He feels he's going to die. It's kind of cool to see an alien species without its shirt on. Has it happened before? I'm sure it has. I mean, all these damn Star Trek episodes. But I don't recall. Or if they did, I mean, it wasn't anything too wild. I mean, if a Klingon took his shirt off, it was just like a regular body underneath. But I don't recall an alien, like imagine a Cardassian, seeing a Cardassian without all that uniform and stuff. It'd be cool to see how their bone structure is. And that was cool. It's very detailed. You could tell it was a bodysuit in some, when he did some movements. And, it's Star Trek. I can handle that. Some great but not so great special effects. Especially this one here where, speaking of bad special effects, where got this knife that totally doesn't look like it's made out of anything sharp. And Saru tells Michael that he needs her to cut off his ganglia so that he can die peacefully or in less pain. And as she's about to cut, they fall off on their own. And the effect for that was really bad. But anyway, the editing for it and everything. But they're gone. The ganglia are gone. And they fell off by themselves. And what happens? Saru's like, what? Right? Because that's not supposed to happen. He's supposed to die. And he goes back to sickbay. He's feeling good. And he doesn't have fear anymore. Like his fear instinct is gone. And he realizes that, hey, my whole life has been a lie. He just got woke, right? So because Saru had made this pact with Starfleet, with Georgiou, to not go back to his home planet because his home planet is still like pre-warp, so they don't want to break the Prime Directive. But now he's like, yo, what am I going to do, right? Because everything I've been told, or not just me, like all of my civilization, everything that they have been told about themselves is a lie. So that kind of harkens back to New Eden a little bit and what happened there. And, how they were kind of believing a lie of why they were there, right? So same kind of science versus religion, debate, but done from a different angle, and maybe a little bit more subtle. But that's a deep philosophical issue right there. What does Saru do? Does he go back to his home planet and tell his people that, yo, you don't gotta kill yourselves or, die after a certain age. You can actually get these things cut off you and or let them fall off on their own. I don't know. I didn't quite catch the mechanics of that. And be free, be you, be without fear. So I loved it, and great acting job there. And Saru, great character, probably my one of my favorites from first season, and moving on to the second also. And back in engineering, man, they're having a hell of a time. They're getting high on mushrooms because the blob is kind of there. They managed to remove it from Tilly, but it's pouring a bunch of spores. Actually, I don't think they removed it from Tilly. I think it enveloped Tilly, and they cut it open and pulled her out. But there's all these mushroom spores all over the place, and Reno and Stamets are getting a little high, and then they realize they're getting high. But by the time they realize they're getting high, Tilly's back in the blob. So the previews for next episode looked like it was taking place a lot inside the mycelial network, and that'll be interesting to see. You know, exploring what's in there and discovering that perhaps, hey, we shouldn't be messing around with these creatures. So that's kind of a rundown of the episode. I thought it had a great pacing, great dialogue, great acting, great everything. I mean, there was nothing about this episode that I didn't like. I will probably watch it again. It works as a standalone, but also fits into the greater arc, right? And not just the Spock arc, but this new mycelial arc that seems like to be the B plot, but a very important B plot of the overreaching arc of the show. And yes, congratulations, Star Trek Discovery writers. I mean, you hit the mark. Season 2 has been an improvement on Season 1, and I say this as a fan of Season 1. I really liked a lot that was going on in Season 1. But Season 2 has just raised the bar, and that's cool to see early. Most Star Trek shows take at least to the third season to get going, and it's cool to see that Season 2, it's already got its feet planted on the ground. Maybe it's not running yet, maybe it's not sprinting, but it's jogging. It's on a comfortable jog. It seems to know where it's going. So that makes me feel like we're going to have a lot more Star Trek Discovery moving forward. And don't listen to these wacky dudes on these blogs just for clickbait saying that there's not going to be a season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. Man, this show has been a hit for CBS, man. I don't think that they would have spent this much money on a season 2 if the show hadn't been a hit. I mean, it's a money-making venture, making these Star Trek shows at the end of the day. So don't believe the hype. There's going to be a season 3. And that tweet from Pike there, Pike's not meant to be on Star Trek Discovery forever. I mean, he's there for the season, and he's going to go back to the Enterprise because that's his ship. So, yeah, he's out of a job. But just him. Now, if Michael Shaniqua tweeted how she's out of a job, then okay, that's different. Then possibly, unless, they're going to kill her off or something, she's, then yeah, the show would be gone. But Mr. Pike there, Captain Pike. He's only here for this season. I predict Prime Lorca will be back. I hope so, and I hope he's just as cool as a good guy as he was as a bad guy. And that's that. All right, guys, 30 minutes. Look at that, right on the dot. So, thanks for your support. Please like and subscribe. I'm kind of losing my voice here a little bit. Live long and prosper. And thanks for everything. Leave your comments below. Tell me what you think about the Spock theory. Tell me if you really do think Star Trek Discovery is going to be canceled next year. Why you think that. And that's it. Goodbye. See you all. Till next week, right?